On September 22, 2022, a Boston police detective quietly destroyed his phone. That detail might sound small, until you learn that phone belonged to the man who owned the house where Officer John O'Keefe died. And he destroyed it one day before a court order demanded he preserve his data. But the prosecution kept marching forward anyway, focused on one woman, Karen Red. This isn't just a story about a death in the snow. It's a story about how a system under pressure can build the perfect suspect, even while potential evidence inside its own circle quietly disappears. In this episode of The Hidden Complex, we're not asking, is Karen Red innocent or guilty? We're asking a more dangerous question. What kind of psychological and institutional forces can turn a grieving woman into the only story the system is willing to tell? Because once you see how this story was built, you'll never look at official versions the same way again. Welcome to The Hidden Complex, a faceless true crime channel that studies two layers of every case: the individual psychology, the minds, motives, and behavior of the people in the story, and the institutional psychology, how police, prosecutors, and communities decide what the truth is allowed to look like. If you're tired of copy-paste true crime and you want the why behind the headlines, you're in the right place. Before the snow, before the driveway, before the courtroom, there was a relationship. Karen Reed, a finance professional, a mother, dating Boston police officer John O'Keefe. On the surface, it's not the pairing you'd imagine at the center of a murder case. But psychologically, Karen had four traits that made her an extremely convenient suspect. First, emotional volatility. Friends and witnesses describe arguments, jealousy, alcohol-fueled tension. Whether every detail is accurate or not almost doesn't matter. The image lands: the emotional girlfriend versus the respected officer. That's a story cops, jurors, and the public recognize instantly. Second, alcohol. On the night John died, there was heavy drinking. Here's the crucial part: alcohol doesn't just distort memory, it distorts credibility. A crying, confused, hungover partner sounds less like trauma and more like she's hiding something once police have picked a theory. Third, fragmented memory. You wake up to find out the person you love is dead, after a night you barely remember. The guilt, the self-questioning, the "did I miss something? Did I do something?" loop. That internal chaos can sound from the outside like guilt. Fourth, outsider, insider status. Karen was close to law enforcement through John, but she wasn't police. John had friends in the Canton Circle, including people in the very house where he would be found in the snow. She was close enough to be blamed, but not close enough to be protected. None of this makes someone a killer. But in a system desperate for answers after a cop dies, it makes someone incredibly prosecutable. And that's the storm Karen walked into, drunk, grieving, and already fitting a ready-made villain template. January 29, 2022. A house party at 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. Owned by the Albert family, a family with deep law enforcement connections. There's snow. There's alcohol. There are officers, friends, and people tied into the same social circle. By morning, John O'Keefe is found in the snow outside. He's injured, unresponsive, and soon pronounced dead. Very quickly, a simple story hardens. Karen, drunk and angry, backs into John with her SUV while dropping him off. She drives away. He dies in the cold. But in the crucial early hours, Karen is in shock. She is crying, asking questions, repeating fragments. Her words shift as she tries to piece together what happened. Here's where the psychology turns. Instead of treating Karen like a traumatized partner, investigators treat her like a narrator who is either accurate or lying. Once a detective quietly thinks, "She hit him with the car," every confused answer, every "I don't remember," becomes suspicious. This is confirmation bias in real time. A good investigator should ask, is her confusion normal for someone who just lost their partner in a traumatic way? But a system under pressure asks instead, which of her words can we fit into the version where she killed him? That early mental decision, made in a room not in a courtroom, shapes everything that comes next. Now zoom out from Karen, and look at the house. 34 Fairview Road. Owned by a Boston police officer, Brian Albert. The same Brian Albert who had a Google Nest camera on the property. A camera that could, in theory, have answered the most basic questions of this entire case. Did John ever make it inside? What happened in that driveway? Who came and went? Yet, that Nest data never became the anchor of the official story. And remember the moment we opened with? On September 22, 2022, Brian Albert destroyed his phone. One day before a preservation order required him to keep his data. Ask yourself, If a civilian connected to a murder case destroyed their phone right before a court told them not to, what story would the system tell about them? This is where individual and institutional psychology merge. You have a tight social circle, people inside law enforcement, people whose reputations are tied together, people whose lives get much harder if the angle of blame shifts even slightly away from Karen. Loyalty kicks in, protect our own. Cognitive dissonance kicks in, we can't be the reason one of our own died. So the cause must be out there, not in here. And once Karen is chosen as out there, everything inside the house becomes fragile truth, handled gently. While everything about her becomes hard evidence, handled aggressively. And if you think that's bad, it's about to get worse, because we haven't even touched the 2:27 a.m. Google search that may blow this narrative apart. If you're starting to see the pattern, how systems under pressure create their own villains, this is what we break down here every week on The Hidden Complex. We don't just recap cases, we dissect the minds and institutions behind them. If you want more stories where we pull apart the official version piece by piece, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Now let's talk about that search at 2:27 a.m. One of the most chilling details in this case is just 6 words long. How long to die in cold? According to phone data, that phrase is searched at 2:27 a.m. by Jennifer McCabe, a friend in the circle around John and Karen, and part of the Fairview Road network. Think about the timeline. Officially, John hasn't been found yet. But someone connected to the house is searching how long it takes to die in the cold. Hours before the morning discovery. The prosecution later tried to downplay, reframe, or reinterpret this search. Defense experts pulled digital forensics, timestamps, logs. The debate became, was this search real-time panic? Or evidence someone already knew John was in the snow? Psychologically, this is where narrative control becomes more important than facts. If you are committed to the story that Karen killed John with her car and left him, then every odd data point has to be folded into that script, or minimized. Maybe you call the search a mistake. Maybe you suggest the timestamp is off. Maybe you say she was just Googling something random. But for any outsider looking in, that search is a red flashing light. Someone in the inner circle thinking about dying in the cold? Before the public story says anyone knew John was even outside. Again, ask yourself, if Karen had made that search at 2:27 a.m., would the system have treated it as odd, or as the smoking gun? The pressure around this case didn't stay local. By early 2025, the defense accused the prosecution of extraordinary governmental misconduct, arguing that crucial evidence was mishandled, hidden, or ignored: the Nest camera, the destroyed phone, disputed timelines, that 2:27 a.m. Google search. A federal investigation opened, and then closed in March 2025 without charges. This is where institutional psychology hits its peak. When a system is accused of serious wrongdoing, it has 2 choices. Option 1, admit failure. Open the doors. Expose how bias, loyalty, and pressure shaped the case. Option 2, defend its identity. Minimize mistakes. Declare that, despite issues, the core story remains sound. Most systems choose option 2. Not necessarily out of cartoon-level corruption, but out of something more ordinary and more dangerous: fear of what it would mean to admit, we got this badly wrong. So the story the public gets is often a polished one. Nothing to see here. Some errors, but nothing that changes the big picture. And yet, piece by piece, you can see how the big picture was shaped. A destroyed phone. A missing or underused camera. A suspicious search minimized. A woman with all the psychological traits of a convenient villain. Whether you personally believe Karen Reed is innocent, guilty, or somewhere in between, there's a more uncomfortable question underneath this case. If you were drunk, emotional, and on the edge of a powerful social circle, how easy would it be for your trauma to be turned into evidence against you? This story exposes 3 patterns we see again and again, in cases like Casey Anthony, Chris Watts, and beyond. First, individuals under extreme stress become unreliable narrators of their own lives, and the system can weaponize that confusion. Second, institutions under threat will protect their identity first, and the full truth second. Third, communities prefer a story with a clear villain, even if that story doesn't perfectly fit the facts. Karen Reed's story isn't just about what happened in a driveway on a snowy night. It's about how easily a system can decide who is allowed to look guilty, and how hard it is to fight a narrative once it hardens around you. The psychological forces you've just seen here, confirmation bias, institutional loyalty, narrative control, aren't unique to this case. You can see them in the way the public talked about Casey Anthony. You can see them in the stories built around Chris Watts. And you'll see them in the next case that blows up your feed. On this channel, we don't just retell true crime. We dissect the minds and the systems behind it, so that the next time you see a perfect suspect, you can ask, who benefits from this story being true? If you want more psychological autopsies like this, deep dives into the individuals and institutions shaping these cases, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. And if you're ready to keep going right now, watch the case that mirrors the same psychological patterns you just saw here. It's on screen for you. I'll meet you there.